A remote Alaskan town, 2 presidents, 1 meeting that could redraw borders or trigger a global firestorm. President Donald Trump says he will meet Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15th, a high-stakes, face-to-face effort to push for an end to the war in Ukraine. But the headlines hide the hard truth. This isn't just diplomacy over coffee. Trump has suggested the deal could include territory swaps, language that has put Kyiv and its Western partners on high alert. Moscow confirmed the summit and framed it as a serious push to find a long-term resolution. At the same time, Kyiv's president has made it crystal clear decisions about Ukrainian land can't be made without Ukraine. What will these 2 leaders actually negotiate? Who speaks for Ukraine if borders are discussed? And what happens to NATO, Europe, and global norms if a deal is struck without broad consent? Over the next 10 minutes, we'll unpack the timeline, the talking points, the red lines, and the possible scenarios, from a shaky ceasefire to a seismic geopolitical reset. Stay with me. This is more than a summit in the snow. It's a possible turning point, and the outcome could touch every headline for months to come. Before we dive into this breaking story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the moments that could change the course of history. Let's begin. On August 8th, President Donald Trump announced that he will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on August 15th in Alaska. A surprise, high-stakes face-to-face aimed at negotiating an end to the 3.5-year war in Ukraine. The announcement came via a short social media post and comments to reporters, and the Kremlin later confirmed Putin would attend. So what's actually on the table? Trump has publicly suggested the framework could include some swapping of territories, language that immediately electrified European capitals and Kyiv. That phrase matters because it signals the possibility that any ceasefire or peace deal might formalize Russian control over territory Moscow now occupies. Kyiv has responded bluntly. Decisions about Ukrainian land cannot be made without Ukraine. Let's walk the timeline quickly, because timing tells us who knew what and when. In the days before the announcement, several media reports and diplomatic threads suggested US and Russian officials were quietly discussing terms that could freeze front lines and lock in Moscow's gains. Trump's post then set the public timetable: Alaska, August 15th. Within hours, Kyiv issued statements rejecting any ceding of territory. Western allies scrambled to clarify their positions, and reactionary headlines posed a stark question. Can a deal crafted between 2 powers succeed if the country most affected is not at the table? Who says what? Short version. Trump frames the meeting as a chance to finally stop the bloodshed and secure a ceasefire. He's argued publicly that a negotiated end could require land swaps and has signalled urgency to seal a deal. Putin, Kremlin. Officially welcomed talks framed as searching for a long-term settlement. Moscow has long pushed for recognition of control over parts of eastern and southern Ukraine and Crimea. Zelensky and Kyiv, furious and adamant that Ukraine will not gift its territory and that any agreement reached without Ukraine's direct consent is illegitimate. Kyiv stresses constitutional limits and domestic political realities, why Kyiv's constitutional point matters, and why it's not just legal hair-splitting. Ukraine's constitution and wartime political reality make it extremely difficult for President Zelensky to accept territorial concessions. Even if Kyiv were offered security guarantees or reconstruction aid, openly ceding land to Russia would be politically explosive at home. It could collapse governing coalitions, split public opinion, and delegitimize any government seen as bargaining away territory under fire. That's not just theory. Leaders who negotiate territory rarely survive the domestic backlash unless the population believes the alternative is far worse. How the Allies are reacting: mixed and cautiously alarmed. European capitals and NATO partners publicly reiterated support for Ukraine's sovereignty, while privately signalling concern about being sidelined. Some allies warn that any deal that recognises Russian gains without Kyiv's consent would undermine European security architecture and set a dangerous precedent. Others quietly hope a de-escalation could reduce casualties, even if the terms are politically fraught. Expect diplomats to push for mechanisms that ensure Ukraine's role in any negotiations. Okay, what are the realistic scenarios that could come out of Alaska? I'll give you 3 buckets to watch for. A narrow tactical ceasefire/freeze along battle lines. This would be the least disruptive to Kyiv's legal claims. A temporary halt to major offensives without permanent territorial recognition. It would probably require verification mechanisms and could buy time for diplomacy, but it risks becoming a long, painful stalemate, a negotiated settlement that formalizes Russian control over some occupied areas. This is what critics fear most. It might stop the fighting quickly, but at the cost of legitimizing Moscow's gains. That outcome would fracture Western unity, infuriate Kyiv, and reshape the map, and not necessarily deliver lasting peace, because the underlying grievances and mistrust would remain. A show of progress with no binding deal, followed by renewed pressure and sanctions. Trump could return from Alaska with a framework or headline-friendly announcement that promises follow-on talks, while concrete limits remain unresolved. That would placate some voices but leave the core issues: recognition of territory, guarantee mechanisms, and Ukraine's role undone. What are the immediate risks to watch for? Diplomatic sidelining. If Kyiv isn't meaningfully involved, any agreement will be labelled illegitimate by Ukrainians and many allies. Where this Alaska summit leads could reshape lives, borders, and the balance of power. Or it could fizzle into headlines and unanswered questions. Whatever happens next, one thing's clear: decisions made far from the front lines have real human costs. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like. It helps other people find the video. Subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our deep dives into the stories that actually matter. I post clear, faceless explainers 3 times a week, quick, sourced, and easy to follow. Tell me what you think in the comments. Should Ukraine's fate be decided only by Kyiv, or do international powers ever have the right to broker territory in the name of peace? Be respectful. I'll pin the best replies and feature them in the next video. Check the description for sources and timestamps. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's at stake. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay informed.